Welcome to Now We're Getting Somewhere. I'm Katie, and I'm a certified life coach, but I've also been a management consultant at McKinsey and a product manager at a tech startup. In other words, I know what it feels like to have a life that looks pretty good on paper, but doesn't feel as good as I want it to. I help my professional clients develop lives that are more meaningful, happy, and also more successful. And I want to share the same practical insights with you. Let's go. Hey everyone, I thought that I would put together a little shorty episode for the new year because honestly, there is a lot of content in this kind of self-development space that I inhabit about kind of seizing the new year. And I personally can sometimes find it to be a little exhausting because I think I've mentioned this before. I often just want to chill in the new year. Sometimes the holidays are a lot. So I thought that it might be nice to share a little shorty idea that you honestly might not even implement right now because this idea is about travel. And maybe you just did all the traveling you're going to do for a second during the holidays and maybe your next travel is not for a bit. So you could just keep this idea in your back pocket and use it when needed. And of course, if you are traveling soon, keep it in mind. But either way, it's pretty easy. It's small. It's not about achieving epic goals in the new year. So I thought if you were in the mood to think about self-development topics, it could be sometimes nice to think about one that you're just not even going to implement right now. So I'm going to do a couple of things in this podcast. First, I want to share the story of how I even realized that this was an idea worth sharing. I do that because I think our brain really processes stories deeply. It remembers them. And then I will share about 4 details of how I implement this idea, and then we'll call it a day. So to start with the story of how I realized that this was even an idea worth sharing. So I shared in my last episode, but I'm in this women's group that meets monthly. We call ourselves Fridays. And I was in a meeting, honestly, it was at least a year and a half ago, maybe even more. And one of my friends, for her topic, because we all can ask advice for each other during our time in that meeting, she said that she was going to go on vacation in a couple of months with her partner and her parents to Mexico City. And did any of us have ideas for helping to make sure that trip went smoothly? And I think some of the other women in the group were giving ideas. They were giving good ideas. And then I spoke up and I was like, oh yeah, when Gil and I travel somewhere, either before we go or kind of while we're traveling there, maybe we're in the car, I like to have a conversation about what our intentions and goals are for the trip. So I'll share what's important to me, maybe how I want to feel, what activities feel important to me, and then I'll ask him what's important to him. Honestly, it just felt like kind of a throwaway comment. It's just something that I do and is helpful, but is kind of obvious, right? But everybody turned to me and was like, what? Jaws agape. What? You do this? And it turned out that this idea, which felt really natural and obvious to me, was in some ways, I guess, a really radical idea. And I just kind of assumed that everyone did it because, like I said, it felt kind of intuitive to me. But it turned out that it wasn't. So I'm sharing this idea now just in case it hasn't occurred to you. And I'm not sharing this from a lens of, I am superior. I am a genius at life. I didn't mean that when I said that it was obvious to me. I just think that all of us have things that are obvious to us. And I happen to do this particular thing. And it turns out that not everyone does it and it can be useful. So the core of the idea is really what I just said, that I try to spend a little bit of time before we leave for the trip thinking about what I want from that trip. And then I try to make sure I have a pretty explicit discussion with my travel buddy about sort of what my goals are, my intentions are, and what theirs are too. But we're here anyway. So I thought that I would also, in addition to that, give a couple more, detailed points about how I like to do this. I'm going to give 4 more detailed points, in fact. So the first detail I wanted to share was to say that honestly, I don't use a complex 8-step process to do this. I sort of just try to at some point reflect on this. The most common place that I might do that would be in my morning pages because that's just something I do anyway. I'm journaling anyway. I'm thinking about my upcoming trip. I'm like, oh yeah, what do I want for my trip? But honestly, probably equally often, I might just think about it as I'm moving through my life, as I'm driving to pick my kids up from school or taking my walk or whatever. I'll just sort of think to myself, yeah, what do I want to make sure I do or don't do on my trip, or how do I want to feel? That kind of thing. So I don't think there has to be one way to think about what you want here. So that's the first thing I wanted to share. The second thing I wanted to share was, what kinds of things I am thinking about when I'm doing that reflecting. So I think I would think about a couple of things at once. I would definitely try to think about if there's anything obvious or big that is really, really important to me, either that I do want or that I don't want. So that could be like more day-to-day logistics things that matter to me. Like, for example, I personally, as a big introvert, might want to make sure that every morning I had some quiet alone time where I could journal or whatever before we start our activities for the day. Or it might be like, okay, there's like a couple of really specific activities that are really important to me on this trip, and I know that in advance. So as an example, my husband and I, a couple of months ago, took a couple of days away from the kids and we went up to the central coast of California. It's so lovely up there. And I think I said to him in advance, something that's really important to me is that I'd really like to take an e-bike tour one day. And another thing that's really important to me is that I would like one afternoon to wander around the kind of downtown area and go shopping up there. So those could be the kinds of things like about logistics or sort of about like activities. And then there could also be a logistics side of things. So like when I was doing my reflecting for that trip, I was also thinking to myself, another thing that's really important to me on trips is I like to have the option of having like one meal a day at the house that we're at. I just like not having to go out for every meal if we don't want to. So I would like to make sure that we like pick up enough food from the grocery store when we get off the freeway so that we can do that. So, those are just the kind of things I'm thinking about. And then there's like a deeper level to all of this, which is I will also try to make sure that I'm checking in with myself about how I want to feel. So I think for this trip that I was just sharing that we went on a couple of months ago, I think I wanted to feel kind of calm and unhurried and restful. But I also did want a little bit of kind of like vibrancy or stimulation or juiciness. And I say both of those things because we had done a couple of solo trips over the past couple of years. And the ones that we've done in the past, I think we were just like both so burnt out. I think my only goal for some of those trips was like rest. Like I honestly didn't even really want almost any stimulation at all. And I just wanted to like read and lie around and take long walks. But this time I did notice that I wanted a little bit more stimulation, a little bit more oomph. And so that kind of led to some of my desires for like the e-bike tour, or making sure I walk around downtown or things like that. So that sort of speaks to kind of all of that. I wish I could say that I always start with how I want to feel. I could certainly have presented this podcast in that light, like start with how you want to feel and let it inform what activities you want to do. But the truth is that I'm kind of just like thinking about them all at once. Sometimes I know before I even begin what activities I want to do. And then sometimes thinking about how I want to feel informs my activities. I kind of do it both ways. I'm not a stickler for this kind of thing. So that's like the I guess second point that I wanted to share about what I reflect on when I am journaling or when I am just walking around thinking about what I want from a trip. And then the third thing I wanted to share, which is about when I talk about with Gil. Honestly, realistically, it's probably a series of small conversations because there was some stuff in advance that we had to think about. Like if we wanted to do this e-bike tour, I wanted to make sure we like got some tickets in advance. So there was probably a series of small conversations. But one thing that I do always try to do is like have at least one sort of explicit big picture conversation, either like right before we go there, like maybe the night before, or like this place we were driving to. So like on the car ride up. So I will initiate that. Gil is usually pretty game to have that conversation, but that is something that I usually just bring up because I want to share what I'm wanting and I want to make sure that I really explicitly know what he's wanting. And then the fourth kind of more specific detail I just wanted to share about this is that to say, of course, you're going to tailor this to your audience and you're going to be reasonable. So my friend who I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast in my story, she was going to go to Mexico City with her parents and her partner. And, the way that she could have a conversation with her partner, who she's now married to, but wasn't at the time, about her preferences and his preferences, she's probably going to have more inherent comfort with having a more direct and detailed conversation with him than she would have with her parents. Probably just because they probably have more open and detailed specific conversations just more generally. Not like she couldn't talk to her parents about these kinds of things, but it would just be a different kind of conversation. So she would, tailor this kind of conversation to her audience. And then, of course, you're going to be reasonable. So, sharing your goals and intentions isn't about hijacking the trip with only your preferences. The whole point of this is to better understand what the other person wants too. So maybe you'll have this conversation, you'll realize that there is a day or an afternoon or multiple days and afternoons where what you want is in conflict and you get to decide what to do about that. So maybe you're going to do different things because you just want different things, or maybe each of you is going to compromise one day and then get what you want the other day just so you can stay together. So it's not about you getting what you want. It's about making sure that you guys find compromises and trade-offs that work for both of you. And that's it. That's this episode, team. Just about reminding you that if you haven't thought of it before, it's so useful to, before a trip, think about your intentions and goals, and to tell your travel companions and ask what their intentions and goals are too. It's a shortie, this episode, but I hope it will help you the way that it apparently helped my friends. Take care, everyone. If you really want to change in a meaningful, lasting way, that's when you need a life coach. Every client I've worked with has had incredibly personalized reasons why they're in the tired or anxious or stuck or uninspired state they're in. Working with me can help you identify those roadblocks, which are usually blind spots that you genuinely cannot see, and implement a profoundly customized, doable plan for overcoming them. I have a very small, high-end, one-on-one coaching practice. If you'd like to be my next client, reach out at katiesiever.com. I'd love to meet you.